Hey everyone, welcome to the Intelligent Conversations podcast, where we believe everyone has a form of intelligence that resides within them. Our goal is to encourage these type of conversations for our audience to listen to. Without further ado, welcome to the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Intelligent Conversations podcast. Today I have the honor to speak with Chris Burcher. He is a former academic scientist with a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology. He retired to become a stay-at-home dad and encountered many challenges thereafter. Today, he's combining his skills in self-help and science to solve the are versus the should problem. Now, Chris, thanks for coming on. I'm excited to listen to what you have to say, but I'm thinking we just dive right into this. How do you come about finding this problem, are versus should?
Well, I appreciate you asking me that, and I appreciate you having me on, and I'm flattered to be considered intelligent. But so the basics for the are versus should problem. When I was 18, I wanted to be. I was compelled by my parents to go to college, like many of us are.
Yeah.
Right? I had to, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do that, but that's when I first felt sort of what Don Miguel Ruiz calls domestication. That I was being moved along by the world and taught things that maybe I wasn't even aware of. And so I went to college. I agreed to go to college because I didn't see another choice. And I didn't know what I wanted to major in. So I was kind of a navel gazing hippie freak. And I thought, well, philosophy sounds cool. I'd love to learn more about that. And then all these voices. So that was sort of my R, right? I had sat there and thought, what do I want to do? Who am I? I want to study philosophy. And then the world, my academic advisors, my dad were like, what are you going to do with that? You need to get a job. You go to college to get a job, not to. And I sort of let those voices win, the shoulds. I got shoulded into a different path. And at the time, I remember the argument was, what are you going to do with a philosophy degree? The only thing you can do is become a professor. And I thought, well, I guess that's a bad job. Nobody thinks I should do that. And what did I end up doing? So I went on a track that I thought I would get a job, but ended up getting basically the same job. And then that's when, the beginning of all that was sort of, oh, how did I end up here? And this is when I was about in my mid 30s. How did I get here? What did I do? And now, almost 15 years later, I look back and I think, wow, that 18-year-old kid was living in his R, right? He knew who he was. He knew what he wanted to do. He wasn't influenced. And then I spent the last 15 years or 20, 30 years being influenced by the American dream, right? The white picket fence, the sports car, the motorcycle, the wife, the job, all that stuff. And so I thought, does anybody else resonate with this thing? And I would ask people, and I would say, do you ever feel like you wrestle between the person that you are and the person that you should be? And 99 times out of 100, the people would be like, yeah, dummy, everybody does that. So I thought, hey, I'll investigate this in podcast form.
When I saw that, when you published when you submitted a request to be on my show and stuff, I was like, that is a good question right there. Are versus should. Because I think a lot of people for those of you that listen, I do an intelligent question of the day when we do this. And I'm like, man, that's a good question. And I like questions that make us think deep. So when it comes to are versus should, I kind of want to touch on something that you said, the American dream. When you said that, I was like, I think everyone thinks the American dream is so specific. That's, like you said, the wife, the cars, et cetera, right? And I actually beg to disagree. I was like, man, I think the American dream comes down to what you want, what you see your dream being, right? It's the government's there. So then they give you an opportunity to try and create that vision, create that dream, right? But it's not the standard, what everyone else says is the American dream. So I kind of want to get your thoughts. I don't know if this is what you did, but what came to be your American dream? What came to be hey, this is what my dream is, my vision?
Well, first, I think, number one, I think you're a little younger than me anyway. And I look at people younger than me, a lot of people complain about millennials and all this. And I go, no, y'all have it figured out. You didn't drink the Kool-Aid. I love this. I look at my kids, and like my oldest daughter has kind of drunk the Kool-Aid. She's 19, but she's kind of like I was when I was younger, more influenced by what I call the American dream. But I'll get to that. So first of all, I just think awesome. That's what I want to hear, that people aren't going to do this. Right. I used to say that retirement is wasted on the old, and youth is wasted on the young, because you don't actually enjoy the opportunity you have in those periods. But what you just said suggests to me that young people might actually not be doing what we did. And I think it comes down to what I call like the post-World War II. Of course, I wasn't alive then, but I think what happened was the Depression was really bad. And then we came out of the Depression, and everybody collectively went, we want a better life than this. And so I think there was a real cooperative period where people, adults, citizens, voters, the government all sort of interacted to be like, okay, what do we need to make a better life? And that's when this white picket fence, everybody can own a house, everybody has a job. It's a secure job, and you have a pension so that when you retire, and all that was sort of created. And it had this power that I think lasted up to about my generation. I was born in 72, and it started to trickle away. And so more and more people after that were like, no, that's dumb. Or, we're far enough away from that. But I think that the American dream at that time, there was only one vision, and it was work 40 hours a week, make money so that you don't have to suffer like we did in the Depression, and so that you'll have these things. And by the time you are in your twilight years, you can stop working and have enough money to live out the rest of your life and do some fun things. And I don't think anyone was nobody set me down and told me that's what I was going to do. You just pick it up, and you just sort of had this understanding that, everybody, I remember when I graduated high school, you were either going to go to college or you were in a trade. So you basically needed to show the world that you had a mechanism to pay your bills. And if you didn't have that, you were a freak. Right. And so nobody, and it was hard. It's hard to be sort of outcast and set aside. And I think, the younger generations, it's more of a group power. You look around and there's another guy that's like, yeah, I don't have a job either. And you're like, sweet, what are we going to do? So we just didn't have a support system where there was no alternatives.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you said there, especially coming into when you said your daughter was 19. I'm 19 as well. I'll date myself.
Wow, I would have said that's great. I would have said 30.
Oh, what?
That's awesome. Not because you look old, just because you got a podcast.
So I'm 19, and I when you were saying those problems that arise, I'm like, I think it's slowly moving. Where it's been so just ingrained in our society, like you said, it was a collective effort. It was just especially college is there's still people, a significant chunk of people from my graduating class in high school went, right? But I was talking with some of them, and how much debt you taking on? And they're like, oh, crazy amounts. Dude. And then I'm like, oh man, you comfortable with that? And they're like, oh, well, it'll pay for itself when I get the job. I'm like, all right, whatever. I'm not going to judge, because right now I barely make enough to get by. Right.
Right.
It's
nothing wrong with that.
I'm like, I want to pursue entrepreneurship. And I was like, let's go for it. What the heck? What's the worst that could happen? Right. I fail, boo-hoo. And I remember reading this article, and it was 70% of Gen Z has entrepreneur role tendencies. And I was like, that's interesting. And then I started looking at some of these companies and how they're transitioning for that. Cause you gotta be able to treat your employees right. Cause when it was the baby boomers, right, when they were working, it was, hey, we'll give you the job, the security, everything. Right. And as long as you do what we say, and it was mutual, and they were both fine. Well, then as it started trickling down, it's millennials, it's oh no, we actually have to, be conscious, say, hey, we'll have you work this specific thing. And it's more geared towards them. And now as Gen Z's entering the workforce, it's more of, oh, these guys want to work for themselves. They don't like being told what to do, essentially. And it's it's so funny, because I'm sitting there, I'm like, well, there's DoorDash, right? Uber. I'm all these companies that are starting to grow exponentially huge, right? I'm that's geared towards Gen Z, they're going to be working for those companies because they have those tendencies. They're like, oh, I can work on my own schedule. I can do work when I want, and I have time to go live life on my terms type of thing. So totally. I kind of want to get your thoughts on this. How would you say, like, I don't want you to date yourself or anything, but what would you say your generation, like, where are you guys at now? Like, what would you say is some of the common themes you see? What did you guys want?
Those are great questions, man. This is so cool because, well, let me just say this, and I'll hope if I forget your question, remind me. I used to think that life was like this hump, right? Like just a one hump thing where you, as you go, you age and you sort of follow this path, and then you realize maybe you did some different things and you kind of have a new path. Maybe you like switch careers in midlife and that's it. Mm-hmm. But now I see it as this bimodal thing. Like I think something happens at your age and then something happens again at my age where you're starting to think about these things. So I think it's so cool that here we are, representatives of those two periods, right? That can have a conversation. It's awesome. Cause I look at my 18 and 19-year-old kids and I'm all of a sudden like reliving kind of those days and having thoughts about when I was that age. And there's something real similar about these 2 points in my life. And I think it probably is true for a lot of different people. But yeah, so now remind me of what your question was. Like, oh, well, I don't know if this is what you're asking, but I think my generation is hitting that second peak. So I was born in 72, and it's a really interesting year for me because I was an ecologist. And in 72, let's say 70, 69, a lot of stuff changed. Yeah. Post-Vietnam War, the hippies, the civil rights movement, that didn't change, but at least it was an inflection point. And so my generation is sort of different. Probably the first generation that was different from like the 50s and post-depression. And I think a lot of us are hitting midlife, and we used to call it a midlife crisis, but now we're doing this thing where it's more like what you're saying. Like the money didn't do it.
Yeah.
I don't feel happy. I don't feel good. I got all this stuff, but it didn't do what everybody told me. I was sold a lie. The promise that this college thing would get me this thing didn't work. And some of us are angry. Some of us turn to drugs. Some of us have affairs. Some of us ruin our lives. Some of us just buckle down and sort of ride it out and we'll die, a sad life. But I think a lot of us are looking at y'all and going, yeah, that's what I want. And I don't know if you're familiar with this Great Resignation.
Oh, yeah.
They're talking about. So that's happening. And it's not really with my generation, but I think we're starting to identify the things that we actually did want. We didn't want the money. We wanted just what you just said.
Yeah.
Freedom to make my own schedule, some autonomy, some appreciation that I'm not just a cog in the machine, but I'm a human being that has things to contribute. I'm not just going to like make money for you. We're all, my generation or people my age are doing a lot of different things, but I'm sort of focused on this wanting to change our lives and like live the best life we can. My wife's a doctor, MD. If somebody's 18 and thinking, what am I going to do to make a whole lot of money? Like, am I going to win the rat race? You're going to do what my wife did. But the truth of that is she really doesn't like her job. And our secret little dream is that we can figure out a way to generate passive income, work as few hours as possible, spend the most time together as a family, and let her quit her job so that we can like get a sailboat and sail around the world or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us are there.
Yeah. I think, a lot of us are I think COVID definitely kind of accelerated that because it forced us home and we're like, wait a minute. Like I can actually, especially with the internet, they're like, I can work on my own time. Like I could work at night. If I'm more productive at night, do it. If I'm more productive in the morning, I'll do that. Right. But I'm like, all of a sudden I think we found some of this newfound time and it's like, oh wait, like I like this. Like, I'm like, like, wait, I can actually like go out and do something. Oh, I can hang out with my kids. Like, this is awesome. Like, and I think again, there's multiple factors I think that are contributing to this great resignation, but I think that's what comes, like, honestly, it's people saying, I don't want this anymore. I think that's what it really comes down to is like, And I love that you touched on the passive income. I don't know if you've read his book by Robert Kiyosaki.
Oh yeah.
The Rich Dad Poor Dad. Yeah.
Totally.
Fantastic book about generating passive income and all that. And so I think a lot of people are transitioning to that. They're like, oh, there's other options. It's not just college or trade. It's like, oh, you can start a business. Oh, you can buy into a business. Oh, you can invest. Oh, you can go to college. Oh, it's like, wait, there's like 20 pathways I can take.
Right.
Like,
right. And as a human being, the last thing we need is constraints. What we need is all of those pathways as options, I think. I mean, some people get overwhelmed by choice. Some of us do just kind of need to be pointed in a direction.
Influenced in a certain direction, say. Hey.
Yeah, but I think it reminds me of when I worked at a pet store, and I worked in the fish department, and we had I'm not kidding, 70 different fish foods. And
man.
Almost every day I would find a customer over there just staring at the fish foods, overwhelmed to the point where they couldn't make a decision. And I would just sort of help them. It didn't matter. They're all the same.
Well, but especially when it comes to fish food, it's like, I'm like, it's like, well, do I go with the cheapest option and maybe kill the fish?
Yes.
Or do I go with the more expensive one and get ripped off? I don't know.
But when it's your life, you want to have options. And ideally you have people. I toy with the idea of starting a new blog or writing a book or something called 13th grade, all the stuff that we should have done in school that we didn't do. And part of 13th grade would have all these people come in and go, hey, have you ever considered this option, or this option, or so that we're exposed to those choices. So we know that we have them. Because again, for me, it was college or a trade. And the funny thing about that, so the most money I ever made with a PhD was $65,000 a year. And it's been a few years, but they're still comparable numbers. My brother barely graduated high school, started working in a bicycle shop, had a kid at 19, never went to college, and ended up, he now is a motorcycle mechanic, and he makes $78,000 a year. So wow. Two brothers, same family. I did the American dream path. And, that's a lot on me. If I had stayed in my career, I might be making as much money as him. But it just goes to show you that, I was told, don't do trades. That's for the dumb.
Yeah.
That's for the poor kids. It's like, are you kidding me? Finding a plumber or a welder or a mechanic right now, they got all the power.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes down to just basic economics, right? Supply and demand. It's like, if you say, oh, everyone go to college and get this specialized degree, it's like, oh, now we have this supply of workers. And it's like, wait, where do we put them? And then all of a sudden trades are this high demand. It's like, you're going to get paid more to do that. It's like, it's basic economics, right. You guys.
Well, it's funny. We tried talking about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. My wife has tried to get all of our daughters to read it. And I've even gone so far as to say, if you can write me a 1-page summary of this book to prove that you read it, I'll give you $100. And so, but they have none of them have done it. And I think you having done that is going to put you on a really good path, because none of us, most of people I know, were unaware of that sort of thing, until we were much older. So that's pretty cool.
So yeah, I like that you said people, I think a lot of people don't take action. They have these ideas in their head, but they don't know how to go about it. I kind of want to get your thoughts. How will you go about, acting on things? Because I think we hear a lot of stuff, especially with the internet. It's like, man, you're just bombarded with information. I think especially this coming generation, where we have access to literally all the information we could ever want. And we can try and connect these pieces of information. I think the biggest deciding factor is going to be who acts and who doesn't. So I want to hear it from you. How do you get someone to act on things that information and points and ideas?
Well, man, that's two things. One, I have said that. I mean, we are sharing a brain. I've often said, I used to tell my students, you don't need information anymore. Nobody needs to generate more information. All you got to do is click a button and you have infinite information. What you need to do is do something with it.
Exactly.
So I'm 1,000%. And then the action thing, I mean, that is it. And I think what happens is analysis paralysis, right? You're like the fish food. You're bombarded with so many different things, and you think, well, I know I don't want to go to college, but do I become, a YouTube star. I mean, even if it's just like you want to be an influencer, well, do I focus on podcasting or do I focus on a YouTube channel, and do I use Instagram or TikTok? I mean, just that stuff. And I think what people don't understand is that none of those decisions is going to make or break you. It's taking the step that's going to make the difference. And you'll wander through. And I think that's a leftover from my generation, because we were taught that life is a linear path. You go to high school, you go to college, you do good in college, you get a good job, then you get married, and then you buy a house, and then you have 2 kids. And it was a linear path we were sold. And I think we're still stuck on that, when in reality,
it's all over the place.
There's plenty. I remember when I was going to go to grad school, and grad school generally, master's degree is 2 years. And I was, I guess, like 24. No, I was a little later. I was in my late 20s because I took some time off. And I thought, I can't possibly I wanted to go to Alaska or Montana or Japan and study the ecosystems there.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I can't be gone for 2 years. 2 years is so long. I won't even know my parents when I come back. And now, of course, looking back on that, it's a blip. So I think that's part of the problem with taking action, is you think, well, if I go 2 steps down and it's the wrong path, I'll have lost all that time. Right. And I'll never be able to get back. But in the reality, that's 100. So not true.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you just encourage people to fail, right? Or to have the courage to take the step and potentially fail.
Yeah. I like that. It's almost, this is something I like to talk with people. It's a process oriented mindset. They use it all the time in sports. It's like, especially in basketball, I played basketball for a little bit when I was in high school. And the funny thing is when you're playing, you mess up like 80% of the time. Like there's always a coach screaming at you saying, what are you doing? And it's funny because I think sports actually teach you to say, hey, it's okay to fail. At the end of the day, though, it matters, hey, what that score says. It doesn't matter, 5 plays ago that you traveled or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah.
It comes down to, hey, what is going to happen in crunch time? What's going to be the end result? What are you going to do? And I think people that just have the consistency to keep working at it, learning, growing, they're going to get the end result that they want, because it's just, they want it so bad. Right. So I kind of want to get your thoughts on this. And then after that, I'm going to ask you the intelligent question of the day. But so when it comes to your are versus should problem, how would you solve that? I want to know what that is. I feel like I still don't grasp what exactly that
right
is.
Well, I mean, so I think another example would be sort of like when you feel like maybe you should, this is a big one for people, I think, decide that you want to get married or whether you're going to have kids. There's got to be a way. What you want is a definitive answer. You want to say, okay, self, do I want to have kids? And you just wait for yes or no. And that's not going to happen. And so I think we've lost that ability to sort of listen to again, I'm speaking for me mostly in my generation, lost the ability to be able to listen to ourselves. And so in place of figuring out what we really want, we allow, the shoulds are going to win. Whatever is out there going, do this, that's what you're going to do. And so, it could be, it's like, I'm going to take a job. Like, say you get offered a job and you're going to make a whole bunch of money, but you got to move to where I live, in the middle of nowhere where there's nothing to do. And you're afraid maybe you're not going to be happy. You're not going to meet people, but the money, there's a way to get inside yourself and answer that question that's meaningful. And then there's a way to sort of avoid it out of fear or making the wrong decision or fear of failure. And as soon as that opportunity presents itself, something's going to come in and go, take the money. And so, it's the solution to the problem is learning how to connect back to yourself the way that we did for the first 200,000 years of Homo sapiens existence on the planet. I look back and say a lot of this happened 2,000 to 4,000, maybe 5,000, 10,000 years ago, when our species sort of shifted in the way it did things, and then culminated at sort of like the Industrial Revolution, where we made this massive shift where technology sort of got in the way, and we just lost touch with our hippie selves, or, you know, our more touchy-feely selves, and the ability to hear that. And so I think the R is there for everybody. It's our intuition. It's our gut. You know, you probably experience it in sports when you have this seconds, like, do I pass or shoot? And you make a decision, and then you can go back and sort of say, I shouldn't have done that. Why did I do that? And it's like, well, maybe you can think and go, oh, I knew that I was open, but I didn't pass because I thought I should pass. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we just don't know how to do that. And I think with the change in my generation, and then everybody younger than me, there's more and more people out there that are figuring out how to do that on our own and collectively with things like therapy or, I mean, I think that's the pathway to success.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So I'm gonna drop the intelligent question of the day on you. So here it is. So the pathway that you were talking about, how do you enjoy the process of that path, right? How do you enjoy it? Because I think you want to enjoy that present moment. So how do you enjoy the process of becoming who you are in the future?
That is awesome. That is it, right? That's a $1 million question. And I think there's lots of people who have written about this. There's lots of books. There's lots of ways, like Eckhart Tolle, what is it? Be here now, or it's the journey. It's not the destination. For me, I had to learn a specific. I had to deal with some problems. Like, I had to identify the impediments to doing that. I struggled with being in the moment and sort of being obsessed with the goal and hurrying up to get to the goal, you know, like, and then being like, what did I do for the last 3 years? Like, I got the PhD, but there's very little about the 5 years of grad school that I can remember because I was in such a hurry. And so it's been things like, learning what my limiting beliefs are, learning what it was that I was taught as a kid that I was unaware of, that's getting in my way and causing me to think like this, and sort of learning to let go of those things and think for myself. Something like the big ones people struggle with is I'm not good enough, or I don't belong here, or there's something wrong with me, or I'm different. You know, those sort of things get in the way of enjoying the moment because you're so obsessed with the world seeing you as being successful. So it's like letting go of the ego. And then the big one, and I never would have told you this, like even 2 or 3 years ago, I thought this was a bunch of hokey crap, is meditation and mindfulness, because that's what's taught me how to stop and remind myself, oh, I want to enjoy this. Stop rushing. You're rushing. I just couldn't do that. And I didn't, and this is the weirdest thing, and I want your listeners to know, it's like, I didn't know meditate. That's not why I meditate. I didn't think that's why I was meditating. But now looking back, I realized that in forcing myself to at least learn how to meditate, I've developed that skill. And so that there's, I think there's a set of things that people can do to help them, you know, snap out of the destination seeking and enjoy the journey.
I love that answer. Everyone that's listening right now, that is the intelligent answer of the day right there. That was great. So yeah, I kind of want to touch on that. Like, just add on to what you said.
Yeah. What's your take? I want to hear what you think about that.
I think some of the best, this is something that I've learned, I would say maybe a couple months ago. And I was sitting there, I'll just be honest, I was kind of miserable. I was just like, this sucks. Like, why am I doing this? Like, because I'm seeing all these other people social media does its job, right? It's like they only post the good stuff. Yep, I'm only seeing them. I'm like, I'm working my butt off and they're out there partying. Like, what's going on? Yeah. And I finally sat there and I was having a conversation with my mother and I was like, wow, what seems to be the problem? And then she's like, well, look how far you've come. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? I was like, she's like, well, take a step back and like look at what you've done the past year. And I'm like, well, I've done this and this and that. And then as I'm talking myself through what I've done, I'm like, that's awesome. I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, I'm like, I feel like I've lived 10 lifetimes or something. And then she's like, yeah. And I'm like, huh, that's interesting. And I'm like, so my take on that is you have to be able to take a step back and reflect on what you have done and say, hey, I've had failures before. And guess what happened? You worked through it. It's all good,
Right.
right? Like, even though you're stressed to the core right now, you feel like a failure right now. Guess what? You know from the past experience that this is going to happen right here. And I'm like, man, I need to reflect more on my life. I need to like record some of these things. Like, I've journaled a couple of the things that, hey, this is stuff you've done.
Yeah.
And I love reading back on some of that stuff, because I'm like, man, I love reading like 14-year-old me, because I'm like, man, you were an angry kid. I'm like, I'm like, good thing you're not that anymore. Or I read my 16-year-old self, I'm like, really? That was your biggest problem? Man, that's nothing. Like, you were so, and so that's my way of like enjoying the process, is like, hey, look how far you've come, man. Like, enjoy this moment right here. So thank you for coming on. I've really enjoyed what you've had to say, really what things that you had to say. So if people want to reach out to you, or like, I don't know if you have any books, or like you want people to do business with you or anything, what's the best way that they can get a hold of you and do that?
Yeah, I don't have anything to sell yet, maybe one day, but I blog, podcast, and have a YouTube channel, but it's all housed at www.chrisburcher.com, which is CHRISBURCHER.com. And I write on Medium, and I've got social media pages and stuff, but most of the stuff is going to be on my blog, which has got links to the podcast and all that. Or you can subscribe to Knowledge Plus Experience Equals Wisdom, which is the name of the podcast. And yeah, I got to say, I really appreciate you cementing a lot of things I've been thinking about, and sort of validating and verifying and representing, your point of view for me, because it's going to be really helpful in some of the stuff I've been working on in my head.
Yeah, it's definitely a journey, I will say that. So thank you for coming on. I really enjoyed having you on this show. So just, yeah, thank you so much, man.
No, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, that is Chris Burcher. As you can tell, he's a very intelligent person, has great things to say. I would take a lot of his things, apply them into your lives, and do what you can to live a better life. So stay tuned till next week. We have a great guest lined up. See you guys next week, and let's get after it. Hey everyone, if you liked this episode and would like to hear more, be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button. We release a new episode every Wednesday for you guys to listen to. Thank you guys so much for the support that you give. We could not have done this without you guys. If you would like to be a potential guest on the show, check out intelligentconvos.com, and there should be a form there for you guys to fill out. Thank you guys again, and let's get after it.